What's up, everyone? Thralls Metal here once again. I am Necrotic Nick.
And I'm Jammin John.
And we have an album review for you. So, on November 15th, Despised Icon dropped their new album, Purgatory, out on Nuclear Blast Records. This band is from Montreal, Quebec. They are one of the more recognizable deathcore bands that came out in the early 2000s. They've been around since 2002. Now, they broke up in 2010 and reformed in 2016, and this is their second album since reforming. So let's get into it. Opens right away with a intro that I'm not going to try to pronounce because I suck at pronouncing anything in French or Quebecois.
I think it was Denier Soufflé.
Soufflé? I can't.
The word soufflé was in there.
Yeah.
Ratatouille.
Yeah, no. But it kind of opened with a creepy bit of breathing, which I thought was just kind of...
Yeah.
But all in all, I thought it was a pretty cool intro. It was very melodic. There were some acoustic guitars
Yeah, some
in
acoustic guitars, yeah.
Really nice. Then we get into the first track, the title track, Purgatory. And instantly on this one, I noticed it had a little bit more death metal flair versus deathcore.
It had the lightning double kick intro.
And the riff was almost kind of like Behemoth-ish or like Hour of Penance. Very like brutal death metal.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, this is pretty interesting. But it gets more into their standard fare of deathcore and a touch more on the slam side here. There's definitely a lot of slam moments on here that remind me a lot more of bands like Devourment.
Yep. And this band always had slam moments. They just appear a little bit more
frequently. At least in the first half, I would say. They definitely appear with some great frequency. The production on this is really polished.
Yeah.
Very straightforward. The drums are super out in front. And, I mean...
They always have been. This band's always been kind of known for its drummer. Still Alex Pelletier. He's always been a staple of this band as far as his ability to blast beat with precision.
Hyperblast, too. Like, there's a lot of hyperblast on there that definitely reminded me of, like, Archspire and Cataclysm, which are two bands definitely known for the hyperblast. Now, they still have two vocalists, which... I've never really been a fan of that. I think, honestly, stick to one of them and kind of just pick one. I
don't get it.
Because there is definitely a difference between the two. One definitely has a more hardcore / metalcore delivery and almost kind of rappy in a little bit. And then the other guy is definitely more of a brutal death metal vocalist and gets down and does the pig squeals a lot. So there's definitely a distinction between the two.
I hate pig squeals. I hate them. I hate them. I'm sorry, YouTube land. I hate pig squeals.
I'm not a big fan of them either. But honestly, I never saw the need for two vocalists because honestly, I think one could do a lot. There isn't a lot of moments where they do a lot of interplay back and forth where two vocalists were really required.
Right. And I think having the guy that pretty much barks the vocals or raps or does whatever he does, I think it takes away from any brutality. It kind of slows down the momentum, I think, when he does it. Maybe it's because I'm such a fan of death metal vocals.
I mean, honestly, when I think of, like, because he does a lot of build-up, it's like kind of a cleaner build-up, and then he goes in the growls. It reminds me a lot of bands more like August Burns Red. And, it just really doesn't, again, pack the brutality that the music does. The music is very, very heavy, but unfortunately not very imaginative on this. There are definitely some killer tracks on it, though.
Agreed.
The first one I really got into on here was...
Vidange?
Vidange, I think that's how you pronounce it.
That's how Google told us. Not a big deal.
Sorry, Quebec. We fucked up, probably. This one actually kind of broke the mold a little bit as far as what they were going for, because deathcore and slam riffs are pretty much what you get up until this point. And this one actually opened up like a grindcore song. Mm-hmm. Actually, grindcore, D-beat, and it really was kind of refreshing at this point because you weren't hearing the same stuff. It wasn't as repetitive. And, repetition you run into on any album, and sometimes there's good repetition and bad repetition. This one, it just sounded like they were going to the well too often up until this song, which, like I said, had this kind of punk flair to it. It really stood out. It was just abrupt and in your face right away. Now, it kind of lost me a little bit on the bridge where the vocals were almost rapped.
And then pig squealed over the breakdown.
Yep. Of course,
Don't pig squeal over a breakdown.
They had to have a slam riff in there with a pig squeal. But the other parts in there I thought were really interesting. The only thing was The production is very polished on here, which there are people that definitely love that. I like a little bit more grit to my production. And,
especially with a song like this.
grindcore isn't supposed to sound polished.
It's supposed to be nasty.
Yeah, it's supposed to sound like Napalm Death or Rotten Sound or Nawesome. Like, it's supposed to be almost kind of grating in a sense, but in a kind of a cool way. The production kind of loses that there because it sounds too polished, but I thought the idea was really cool. And this was definitely a standout track for me on this album.
Yep.
The next track,
Moving On.
Yeah. The next track, Moving On, which we are moving on to.
Yep. They moved on. They moved on with the sound. It doesn't sound like any other song on this album.
No.
Really just kind of straightforward, organized, had kind of a Misery Index feel to it at times.
Very groovy, very riff-centric, which stands out on this because there aren't many songs here, I'd say, that are riff-centric. They're more built around syncopated breakdowns, slam riffs, blast beats, but not necessarily the most distinct of riffs. In fact, some of them kind of get lost, just with the snare going so loud. You really can't make out a lot of the, bigger riffs there. This one had a solid hook right from the start. Actually, the intro was kind of cool because it reminded me a lot of Psycho, which, cool movie, love Hitchcock.
Yeah.
But when that riff comes in, it was like, wow, that's really distinct. And it had a solid hook right away.
Yep, and it was really straightforward for them. It's not like they were trying to make it a deathcore song or a hardcore song. It's just kind of like they were jamming almost. And
a metal song.
A
flat-out metal song across the
sounded
board.
really good. It even had a guitar solo in it.
Yeah, first time the guitar solo actually popped up. It was just like a very streamlined song. It flowed very well. It bookended that epic moment in the beginning with the intro that kind of sounded like Psycho.
Yeah.
And closed really well, too.
Yep.
Like, it was a solid song. Honestly, best song on the album, in my opinion. I thought this one showed off a lot of cool writing flair. Now, I thought Unbreakable, the next track, was pretty good. Insane drumming right away. The Hyperblast was in full swing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it had, again, a nice, distinct riff to open up the album. I thought it was almost kind of a melodic death metal riff.
I was going to say, I also thought it leaned more just towards death metal or even melodic death metal.
Yeah, I thought of At the Gates or Hypocrisy right away, and was like, oh, that's really cool. And then kind of does some knee-jerk transitions, but it keeps the energy going, which is nice.
Even the breakdown in this leaned away from slam.
Yeah,
again,
the breakdown was actually kind of death metal. It opened up, very palm-muted, like it sounded like it was going to be your stereotypical deathcore breakdown, but then it sort of moved into a really cool tremolo layered melody, which there's not a tremendous amount of those on here, so that does stand out quite a bit. Now, towards the end, I thought we were going to get led into a slam breakdown of the song, and actually kind of surprised me. Moved into more of a early metalcore.
Yep.
Sort of like, almost like Hatebreed.
Yep.
It was just a good, straightforward, mid-tempo, nice riff over it. It wasn't just a open chord breakdown. I was like, oh, this is really cool. This actually has some really cool ideas, and I really liked it because these songs towards the end of the album seemed a lot more imaginative than the opening. Now the next two tracks after that kind of fell into standard fare, and I would say got a little bit generic. Apex Predator really didn't have much for me up until the end of the song, which kind of had a cool sick of it all kind of breakdown to it.
And they had like a really brief tapping solo. Probably 2 measures.
It was just there and it was gone. Like as soon as I noticed it, it was over.
Yeah, right. As soon as I was like, oh, what's happening? It was already gone. So, yeah.
And Legacy felt like pretty much anything from the front half of the album. It really just was kind of there at this point.
Other than this kind of cool heavy stomp opening, stomping riff.
Yeah.
I really don't think there was anything to write home about.
Yeah, just some good syncopated chugs, but again, it was stuff you heard earlier in the album, and definitely something you hear in great repetition on this album. Anyway, Deadweight opened a little bit differently. That one actually almost had kind of a Vader-like death thrash intro. I really like the energy right out of the gate. Very riffy, and then the slams come back from a brief vacation.
It did have a really cool guitar solo, though. Probably, it was definitely longer than anything else that's on the record, and it was pretty tasteful.
Yeah, that was my issue. The middle section I thought was kind of standard. Then around 2 minutes 25 seconds when the solo starts coming in, it gets very melodic again and brings in some cool melodies, a really cool solo, and kind of has this tasteful fade out to the end of the album.
Yep.
And I thought it closed kind of well there. But I thought this album was just kind of overloaded with safe ideas. There wasn't a lot of adventuring, and it became very repetitive and not in a good way where you want to hear, you know, really cool, distinct moments come back. They're just like, oh, they're just doing the chuck again.
I mean, Primus said it best, they can't all be zingers.
They can't all be zingers. So, honestly, I'm going to give this one 2 stars. Don't think it's necessarily a terrible album. It has some merit, but as far as their discography goes, this one is not particularly great. It just doesn't sound very inspired. And I have all their albums from before, and I liked a lot of their earlier stuff. This just kind of screamed like, well, we're kind of running out of ideas.
Yep.
Except for a couple of songs there which really stood out. But unfortunately, when you have some songs that really stand out, and then other ones that are kind of so-so, it really makes the ones that are so-so look a little bit worse. And that was my main issue there.
Yeah. I'm also going to go with 2 stars, and again, I mean, there's not much more I can say that he didn't say in regards to this album being rated as low as it is. It seemed really lackluster. There wasn't a whole lot to grasp onto. There wasn't, you know, sans for a couple songs. There wasn't anything really memorable. And again, I feel the same way. I think it feels like they're kind of, like they kind of threw it together and they were just like, fuck it, well, we're on Nuclear Blast, let's release an album. And it didn't seem like very much thought went into it. You know, if they'd stuck with the couple of songs that were good and taken that pattern and kind of reinvented their sound a little bit since 17 years after they started, I was really hoping they'd bring something more to the table than what they did. And much like Nick, I have at least their first couple albums. I'm a giant fan of Day of Mourning still. The Oaths of Modern Man was a great jam. But I mean, this just wasn't what I was hoping it would be. So, 2 stars.
And again, just our opinion. So, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do shit like this, how often?
All the fucking time.
Catch you guys later.